TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Okay. Welcome to another edition of the RF Video Shoot Interview Series. Today we're joined by a legend in the sport of professional wrestling, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, a man who's probably been all over the country, all over the world. He wrestled under the name Brutus Beefcake, the Zodiac, Disciple, the Butcher. Anything else? Am I missing anything?
Well, the early days started as Ed Boulder.
Right, Ed Boulder. That's what I was going to ask you. My first question basically would be how you got started in the wrestling business.
Probably 1976 in Florida. Started wrestling with Hulk Hogan back then. Terry Boulder.
Right.
And
the Boulder Brothers.
Boulder Brothers started Panama City, Florida. First matches with Ron Fuller and the Roy Lee Welsh in the Welsh territory there. And it was a very interesting start. We trained for about a year and a half prior to that down in Florida, in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and a lot of weight training together, and got big and nasty, so we could make a good start in the business.
How did you meet Hogan?
He lived real close to me. We grew up in the same neighborhood, basically. He's a few years older than me. Both played baseball, rival leagues. I used to watch his team when he was 12 years old. He was the biggest kid in the league. He used to hit the ball so far over the fence. Every team used to protest. They said he was too big to play. It was pretty funny.
Were you guys wrestling fans before you got into the business?
Absolutely. In Florida, there was championship wrestling in Florida, and was big there. And they had wrestling at the Armory in Tampa. And Tuesday nights, and it was so every Tuesday night, basically, you'd see Terry Bollea down at ringside, giving those guys hell. And I used to be up in sitting along the rail in the upper deck there, I guess you'd call it, or something, with somebody, with my older sister and her boyfriend or somebody. Sitting there, just going crazy over the great Malenko and Eddie Graham and those guys, and they're raising hell.
All right. So what gave you the idea to get into the business itself?
Never really even thought about getting into the business, but I was in junior college working a job for a horticulturist, doing landscape architecture and stuff. I was working as a foreman for a while, running a crew, doing $50,000 jobs in one day and making $5 an hour. It's like going nowhere fast. And started training with Hulkster and some of his friends, regularly. And I watched him go through the Hiro Matsuda school. First weekend they snapped. Fred broke his ankle.
Stretch.
And I guess they were trying to discourage him. And the Briscoes and those guys are the ones who talked him into going.
Right.
But then he decided, to go back and to stick it out, which was a good thing. And he finished the school, and then basically they started him out. They wouldn't give him any bookings. They'd book him in Tallahassee and Miami, $50,
Right.
And how you going to make, you can't make a living doing that. So he basically quit and was working on the docks and stuff. And that's when a friend of his from his rock and roll days called him and said, "Hey, come over to Cocoa Beach, open up a gym and train and then try to get some connections." Bob Roop and a couple other guys had expressed, that they might be able to help him and stuff. So he had approached several of his other friends about, going to break in the business with him, and everybody else kind of backed off, and everybody was afraid to walk away from their day job and their security, and nobody was wrestling. It's too crazy. It's too big a chance. And I was looking for something different, and I'd been hanging with Terry for a while, and just had a real good feeling about I knew that something was going to happen. We had a good chemistry together since we'd been hanging out and training together. And so, when the call came, "Hey, you want to go?"
Right.
I'd had my car packed, my bags, ready to go. I quit my job, and I was already beelining it for Cocoa Beach, and then we started up the gym over there and trained 6 days a week, 7 days a week, twice a day for over a year, and didn't have a drink of alcohol, and just bared down, just got huge, and he went up to like 330 pounds. And I went up to like 260. You know,
right.
you know, we just got huge, and we figured, you know, we'd be so big that somebody's going to give us a break. You know, even, you know, somewhere, somehow, somebody's going to say, hey, these guys, you know, somebody's got to give them a chance.
Right.
And that's what happened. Bob Roop got us hooked up, and we contact with Ron Fuller, the Tennessee stud,
right,
you know, and those guys. And so we went up to Pensacola territory and worked there for a while. That's where I actually had my first matches, you know.
Do you remember who you worked with her?
Yeah, the first match was a tag match, and we wrestled Ron Slinker, I think, was my
right.
partner, against Ox Baker and Eric the Red.
I used to work for IWA back in the day. So. Yeah,
it was different.
How did you wind up in Memphis, or how long after that? What other territories did you work in?
Pensacola's the first. We went from there. We actually went back to Tampa and made some calls and got a hold of Jerry Jarrett and brought in Terry. Done a TV for them, and then you know, told them about the brother thing, and
right.
and they liked it. So what they did was, then they brought me in, and I flew in, did a TV, wrestled in a tag match with Ron Bass and Pete Austin, another guy. He just disappeared from the business, but and wrestled a tag match, and they beat the shit out of me and juiced me on so bad that they couldn't even actually had to show it on TV. I was bled so bad, and then they brought in Terry after that. You know,
right?
You know, I'm gonna bring my brother in and get you guys. You know, and then that's actually when they started calling him Hulk. You know, they called him Terry the Hulk Bull.
Right.
And they did this video, and they shot
in
Jerry Jarrett's basement.
Right.
And they started at his feet,
yep.
you know, and it came up, and we started with a great response there, and sold out the Mid-South Coliseum and sold out the territory everywhere. And after about a couple months, as we were going on the territory, then some of the Jarrett's guys, Rough House Fargo, and,
right.
and some of those guys, they started sliding themselves on top of the card above our matches and stuff, and moving us down the card and stuff. And then the houses started falling off because they stopped featuring our angles, and they're doing some really corny stuff,
right?
You know, and so they could figure themselves in the money. And after about 3 months, then one day, all of a sudden, we got our booking sheets, and they had separated me and Terry and had us going to a different town, you know. And then Terry made the call, says, you know, what's this, you know? And they gave him the hoop, baba, and the double talk, you know. And he said,
right.
yeah, that's, you know, okay, well, that's not going to work for us, brother, you know. And thanks, but no thanks. So we hopped in our Lincoln Continental that we had bought while we were in the territory.
Right.
And we started out with a van. And then we bought a car and headed south back to Florida, and set up a meeting with Jim Barnett and the guys here at the Florida office. And then from there we went to Atlanta. Terry went to Atlanta for a while, and I wound up shipping out, I think, over to Bill Watts' territory
Mid-South
in Louisiana.
What was that like?
That was brutal, man. Back with Gino Hernandez was alive then, and
right.
Tank Patton, I can remember, Pork Chops Cash. It was a lot of the older guys at that time were in there. Stan Hansen, the Money Man,
Ted DiBiase.
Right. There was a lot of real good talent there. Don't get me wrong. It was brutal on a guy who was new in the business. Like, you know, for me, they abused me pretty hard there. I got a baptism of fire.
What was Bill Watts like as a?
He was a very, by the book
right.
businessman. You know, a lot of respect for the business. Took care of business, and his territory was doing real well. And but it was tough on me. I was actually roomed up with Buck Robley,
right,
and the Colonel, and the guy. We didn't even really have a place to live. We just went from track to track to track, and did towns like that. You know, so I hardly had a hotel for months. Didn't work out, didn't get to do much of anything but just tag along with Buck, because he was, my ride and my teacher, mentor at that time. And but there was some guys like Ivan Koloff and some other guys in the territory that actually spent some time with me and did try to help me and stuff. And that was a good, it was nice to be able to learn from some of those real professionals, good guys that were good. They didn't try to abuse me. They actually tried to, help me and teach me some things about the business, but I wound up getting a pretty good shoulder injury, and basically I couldn't, couldn't work. So I wound up giving my notice, and then as soon as I gave my notice, about a couple of days after Bill Watts, they came in and said, "Oh, we'd like to stay for another couple of weeks because there was another TV taping coming up." And I was like, "Hey brother, I'd really like to. But my shoulder's blown out. I can't hardly work now." And then so we wound up having some words over that because they wanted me to stay. And I was like, I gave my notice, and so they wound up holding back my last 2 weeks' checks because I wouldn't stay. And
did you ever see Bill Watts we've done a lot of interviews with a lot of different guys that said he was a bully, basically.
He kind of was a bully, yeah. They tried to bully me through that deal, and I just said, look, this is not going for it, man. I've given you 110%. And these guys, a lot of those guys, they worked those TV tapings there in Bossier City, I think it was, and somewhere else, and they just beat the shit out of me day after day, and match after match, and and that's just at least I learned a lot of respect for the business, and I've paid some serious dues, and it's one thing that doesn't happen these days. Really, guys don't pay any dues in the business anymore, and they don't have to have to suffer a little bit because it makes you stronger and gives you respect and things like that, But I finally got out of there with help from Hulkster. He called me and says, "What are you doing, man? What are you doing?" I said, "These guys are killing me between Buck Robley not working out and these guys just beating me to death every night." I said, "I got to get out of here." He says, "Well, get the hell out of there. There's a plane ticket waiting for you at the airport, and fly home and regroup, and then come to New York." And
was he already left AWA after this?
No, he hadn't been there yet. This is 78.
Okay, you're right. That's right. You went there and you did
late 78.
Okay.
When he first he got a meeting with Vince Sr., and they brought him in there, and that's when they actually named him Hulk Hogan.
Right.
And it was great. I flew in first TV, Allentown, Pennsylvania, Hamburg. Met the Grand Wizard, and Fred Blassie, and Captain Lou Albano, and all the great legends back then, and it was a super different thing than I was used to, because the territory was very professional, and the squash matches, New York style. Then they had the guys, and they brought them in, and they just built them for months, matches, and then they featured them on top in the gardens, and and all around, and you had your run of 6 months to a year, whatever, and then the guys would, they'd go to the other territories, and it was a lot of fun. I traveled the roads and worked a lot of house shows for Vincent. I drove with Hulkster, drove him on the road everywhere we went, and trained, got my shoulder rehab, and got some size back. I lost 25 pounds, probably on 30 pounds on the road in Louisiana. And, got myself back in shape. And then we wound up, we got a call out to Portland, Oregon, and went to work for Don Owen in Portland. And it was real good territory back then for a guy like me who had been in this business a couple of years, but really hadn't learned a lot about working, about any ring psychology and things like that. I just been going through the motions and doing a lot of jobs and just getting trashed. And then actually gave me a chance to really go in their territory and start out and work every night in the small territory. guys like Kurt Hennig was who came in there while I was there, and his father came in, the Axe, and worked some programs with us. I was with guys like Rick Oliver, guy from Florida, and Mike. What was his name? No, it was he's still out there. Oh, jeez. You didn't remember his name. Well, you had Buddy Rose and Matt Bourne. And I think Dutch Savage was our booker back then. And we had Flair came through, and Piper and Andre, and a lot of Don used to bring in a lot of talent from time to time for big shows and stuff. So actually, territory was doing well. And that's where I met Stan the Man Stasiak, who was a former WWF World Champion, and he was a great guy, and he's taught me a lot about the business, and I learned a lot about working, and started to learn about psychology and really what to do in the ring and stuff, and as I worked in the top matches of a small territory, and that's basically how you learn, how you really get the feel for doing something in the business is working your way up into on a smaller territory where you work in the top matches, in the main events on the towns, and you're working every night.
I guess from there, where did you end up after Portland?
I got a call from Hulkster about if I was interested in going to Japan. I said, absolutely. And I was kind of...
What year was this around?
That was right at the end of 1980, I think. I was finishing up, I think it was 80. I was finishing up, or 81, maybe 81. I was finishing up there, but I was supposed to be coming back. But basically, I went to Japan for 6 weeks, or 5 or 6 weeks for New Japan. Flew back to Portland and found out I really didn't have a job, so it didn't matter. And I hopped in my car and started driving back to Florida. The trip from Portland.
What was New Japan like compared to the States?
Well, it was great actually for me, even though I was a younger guy without a real big name or anything in the business then. I was a big guy, and so they actually put me right up into a lot of main events with Bill Eadie, the Masked Superstar, and Slaughter, and 6-mans against Hulk and Inoki and Sakaguchi. And after working on a bunch of tags, I wound up getting paired off with Sakaguchi, who was the booker for New Japan then, and because he liked me, because we had several tags. Almost the whole tour was all tag matches, basically, except for a few matches, and he just liked my style. He didn't like to wrestle long matches, but he liked to real aggressive, and I was kind of a wild man and just going crazy over there, grab the flowers and beat everybody up with them, slamming. It's kind of like the original hardcore, we were banging chairs and, throwing through tables and, smashing up everything in sight, back then in 1981, and the Sakaguchi liked me. So it was a good break for me, because I wasn't forced to fight it out with the young boys in the first and second match every night, and 4,000 suplexes and all that. And I would just actually getting to wrestle 6 minutes with a booker.
There you go.
Wasn't making a heck of a lot of money, but it was better than nothing. It was a good experience, and it definitely helped me, as a wrestler, learning and good experience traveling. Getting out to go see Japan, and it was a lot of fun touring with Hulkster over there, because they took care of him like a god. It was crazy.
And then you came back to Portland, and drove back to Florida.
Drove back to Florida, made some calls, wound up going back into the Pensacola territory, and teamed up with Ken Lucas. And then wrestled against the Midnight Express. Dennis Condrey, Norville Austin. And there was one more guy. Jeez, I can't remember his name right now. That was like, they had 3 guys, and they had kind of alternated back then.
Like 3 versus.
Yeah, like the deal. And we actually put the straps on me and Ken Lucas for a while there, and I had a good run. And I think next thing I did was went to North Carolina and went to work with what's the guys there?
North Carolina.
Crockett's.
The Crockett's.
Okay.
Yeah, Jimmy Crockett and those
Right.
guys. Yeah, well, they were pretty brutal to work for.
Really?
Yeah.
As far as what?
Well, they didn't.
Payoffs or just
Yeah, the payoffs were brutal.
Right.
I mean, back then, the Briscoes, Jack and Jerry were there. That's where I met Mike Rotundo.
Right.
He was pretty new in the business. Barry Windham.
Right.
Piper was there. I used to ride with Slaughter quite a bit.
It's Mid-Atlantic territory, basically.
Yeah.
Mid-Atlantic.
He
Right.
had that camouflage limousine.
Right.
You know, we were driving up and down the road in that camouflage limousine every night. It was a good time. I enjoyed it, I actually traveled quite a bit on my own too, and so I met Little Tokyo, and they used to have quite a few of the midget wrestlers wrestling back then,
Right.
And so a couple of the other ones, but I remember Little Tokyo used to like me and travel with me quite a bit. You know, I had a little Datsun 280Z, and we'd go up and down the road, and
Right.
drinking beer. You know, I had
Right.
a cooler in the back. And it was it was a good time. I didn't make any money.
Who were some of the guys that you worked with in that territory?
I'm trying to remember who all was there. Well, Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood was
Right.
live then, and
Right.
worked with them, and the Briscoes, and I think Dory Funk Jr. was there. There was some really good guys to learn from back, in those days.
Right.
It was a good territory. So I actually learned quite a bit. I only stayed there probably about 4, 5, 6 months, but I had a good time, and I was still coming along in the business. Is about 5 or 6 years in the business, and then I was starting to come along, and then Hulk got a call from Vern Gagne. It was like late 81, 82.
Right.
And so then Hulk called me and said, "Hey, we got gonna get a heck of a break up here, and it's gonna be a big deal." And so what I did, I flew back to Florida, and we packed up a bunch of stuff, and I actually drove his car to Minneapolis from Tampa,
Right.
and then he flew in, and the moving truck came up, and we got a place right behind the airport over there, right in Bloomington, Minnesota. I had a big apartment, and worked out of there for a while, and I went back to Japan a couple more times, and worked there for a little while, and then wound up pissing off Greg Gagne. For what, I don't know. I think he was jealous basically because Hulk and I had a
Right.
relationship, and then Hulk wasn't hang out with him and stuff, and didn't want to hang out at the office because Greg wanted to manipulate, and
Right.
he wanted to capitalize on Hulk's time, and as long as if I was around, then Hulk and I were training, and we're doing our own thing as we always had. So I think it kind of cut my throat there. I kind of cut my own throat there
Right.
with Greg and those guys, and they kind of pushed me out, so I won.
What was Vern like? We've heard stories about Vern.
He was an obnoxious, thought a lot of himself. I mean, I guess he was a good wrestler, and but I mean, by this time he was pretty old.
Right.
He wasn't in the greatest shape. I mean,
Right.
body wise, he just he looked like an old guy. It was. I mean, I've seen a lot of the older wrestlers, but guys that are in shape still.
Right, right.
At least and he had a pretty high opinion of himself. And I actually saw him go after Hulk at a TV taping, try to leg dive him,
Wow.
and Hulk just pancaked him. Boom, right into the concrete.
Right.
It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. Smashed his glasses and just crushed him, and all right in front of all the boys. Bobby Heenan, Sheik Adnan, Ken Patera, the Giant, Masa Saito. There was a huge, long list of super talents.
Right.
His territory was dominating at that time. Hulk's popularity was unmatched. I mean, they were rivaling the New York territory easily because they exchanged a lot of talent with
Right.
those guys. And
What was the argument over?
well, I don't know.
No.
It didn't matter
Right.
to Vern if it wasn't Vern's way, then
Was-
and Hulkster had a great take on the business then, and he was really hot and rolling. And then Vern decided that he wanted to like control Hulk and said, hey, I'm going to make you my champion, and I'm going to take X amount of your money from Japan and blah, 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 and do this, and it's just my opinion. But instead of if he would have offered Hulk some type of partnership and give him part of the business and get him, use some of that knowledge he has to take advantage of it, and help with his territory. And then, instead of being kind of trying to bully his way through and tell Hulkster, oh, well, where I'm taking their money. And, Hulk was in a position to negotiate any deal he wanted anywhere,
right.
And Vern basically cut his own throat at that point, because that's when Vince Sr. was ill, and Junior was starting to take over the New York territory.
Right.
Had begun, taking over that territory at that time, late in 82, the beginning of 83. So I was kind of in between territories, and I was actually still, Hulkster got the call. I mean, I was there during that time, and he was starting negotiating with Vince, and then Vern was playing hardball, and and it was like, hey, it's time to make a change,
right?
And then boom, Hulkster went into New York, slammed the sheet 1, 2, 3,
right.
Took the belt, boom, and I mean, they were off and running, and so I was in between territories back then, and they had he was working a program with Big John Studd, and Studd was supposed to be booked over in Austria for Otto Wanz, and it was the guy who ran the Austrian territory, was their champion. Big guy. He was 400 pounds, and he was an Olympic class wrestler. He was a good amateur.
In fact, I heard a story about him, and I think it was Vern, right, where he paid Vern to be the world champion just for like a week or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, something.
Yeah. To have the AWA championship,
exactly.
Right. Well, he was actually the Canadian champion, right, or something, whatever, and so they were looking for somebody. Studd was in the middle of the program. They didn't want him to. They're not going to let him go to Austria to and miss all these major cities, to miss the Garden and miss all the shows. So they were in a little bit of a dilemma as what to do, because they really didn't want to send into their top talents. Normally they send guys like Slaughter or Studd, or
right,
it was a big man's territory, and it was always for the finale of this tournament. They would have a month-long tournament over in Austria, and all the boys would be there. And then they always sent over. Somebody came in for this last week. You do publicity for a week, and then you wrestle the finale of the tournament. Somebody wrestles Otto for the championship.
Right.
So they're sitting there going, "Oh, who are we going to send? Who was send?" Well, Hulkster goes, "Hey, send." They were calling me Dizzy Ed Boulder then, and actually I was wrestling as Dizzy Ed Hogan too.
Right.
And that's Pensacola territory, and then some of the other territories. They're calling me Dizzy Ed Hogan. And still, because everybody associated us as brothers still since Boulder days. So they said, "Hey, send Dizzy Ed." So I got the call from Vince, bound to go over there, and they really built it up as a real underdog thing, because they were, I'm a young guy, not really known, had really wrestled the big territories and got a lot of, TV accomplishments or anything like that yet, and so, Otto was very skeptical, actually, and I got a lot of ribbing from the boys. There's a lot of English guys over there, and they were ribbing me like, "Oh, Otto's going to stretch me, and Otto's going to do this, and it was interesting. You just publicity. You didn't have television there in those days. You had newspaper.
Right.
Every day we went to a different place. We went to a castle. We went to this big winery and a big animal park. Duke or Graf that owned this huge castle and all this shit. And we went over there and we did publicity at a different place every time. At Arnold Schwarzenegger's, where he grew up in the town of Graz there, and went to the gym that he used to work out in, and we did a weigh-in and everything. And I was about 255 pounds back then, and in monstrous shape. I'd been off and training like a madman, and hoping to get a break in the New York territory. Because, Terry was pushing me, hey, you got to get ready, because if the call comes in, you need to be ready. So there was the call
Right.
to go work for Otto, and all eyes were upon me at this point. And so I didn't disappoint him. Otto was fat and out of shape at about 440 pounds, and he's only about 6 foot tall. And so that's a massive, huge man.
Right.
And, over there they have the rounds. Match goes by rounds. And Otto laid out the match, and he does his finish was the steamroller or something, where he does like a little jump over you and rolls over you, and we wrestled probably 5 or 6 rounds, and I pounded the guy. I beat him till my fists were swollen black and blue, and it was just about time for the finish, and he called for a slam, and because it was kind of a standing joke, because Stud and a lot of the guys over the years have tried to slam him, and he's just so big, and he's so short, and his center of gravity is so low that nobody could really get him up. So nobody had the slightest clue that Dizzy Ed Boulder, 255 pounds, could pick this guy up. Well, buddy, I was right for the night, babe. And I went down and his eyeballs like bowled out and said, I snatched his fat ass up, turned him, and slammed him.
Right.
And the whole building shook. And everybody in the building went silent in complete disbelief. They had never, in their wildest imagination, could believe that somebody my size could be strong enough to pick a guy like that up, much less pick him, turn him, smash him down, right? Well, he was so fat that when he hit, his back went out, and he was basically almost immobile. He could barely move. And I was, I'm kicking him and beating on him, and I didn't realize that he couldn't even get up.
Right.
So I reached down and was picking him up, and he hooked me in some type of amateur move and just said, stay there, and pulled me over and pinned me 1, 2, 3, and boom, I was out and up and fucking stomping around and going crazy. And they rolled him out, put him in an ambulance, and took him away. And the people were going crazy, and they'd never seen. It was probably one of the best matches that Otto had ever had in all the years. And it was from the guy that they least expected for him to have a good match with.
Right.
And so that right there, the news went right straight back to New York. And next thing you know, I was in Vince's office, and they were trying to figure out something to do with me. And it looks like they were going to give me a hell of a break. What
were your initial impressions of Vince?
Well, I had known Vince in '78 when I first met him when I was in there in the earlier years, and he was announcing. So, I liked him. He was a personable guy, did announcing. He was always nice to me, and I had no problem with him, at all, really. And I didn't have a whole lot of contact with him, but as far as I knew him, he was nice.
Right.
He was good. He was good at what he did, doing the announcing. But now he was in control of the whole ship there, and the WWF. And I went in his office, and I guess they had come up with the name Baron Beefcake. And I think his wife has actually thought up the name. And their impressions of Baron Beefcake was a guy in a top hat and a tuxedo top and a cane thing, or something like that. And actually it was Hulk and I and Vince. We sat down and brainstormed for several hours and went back and forth. And I think it was Hulkster that said, what about Brutus Beefcake, from Popeye and Brutus, and at the time I had blonde hair and a blonde beard, and we kicked it around for a while, and it seemed like that's what we settled on. And at the time I was horrified because I had no grasp of what a Brutus Beefcake was. It just sounded like the stupidest name that you could possibly think up. And I actually, at the time, I thought that it was just a joke. It was going to make me a laughing stock, that I was going to be, laughed at, and, that it was going to be it was, instead of being my big break, it was just going to be, I was going to be ridiculous and be like the class clown of the territory or something. So Hulkster and I took off and went back to Florida, and I went And he took me to see a guy that made clothes in Florida, and actually made clothes for a lot of the rock and roll musicians, made clothes for Cher, made clothes for Jimi Hendrix. Guy had a lot of really innovative ideas, and made clothes for Hulk's rock and roll band, Ruckus, and in some of his earlier years too, some of his other ones. And we sat down and said, "Now, all right, here's the name Brutus Beefcake. What can we do? We need something here that's just really going to grab the people,
right?
And it's really going to be something they've never seen before." And that's when we came up with doing the spandex tights and all these crazy animal prints and wild colors. At first, had the gold May, and he came with a
right.
bow tie with rhinestones on it. Made these arm bands, some with stones on them, just all different colors matching the outfits and stuff. And when I came out and was strutting around the ring and stuff, I mean, the people were flipping out because nobody ever worn hardly this type of clothes. Mostly it was just guys wearing tights. Some guys had the robe. You had the Ric Flairs, or a couple guys that wore the big robes.
Right.
Maybe like Greg Valentine's, and had the big robes, and the Gorgeous George. But that was, basically everybody just wore wrestling boots and a pair of tights, and that was it. Well, I came out wearing these snakeskin pants and snakeskin things, and this tie and gold lame and all this stuff, and the people loved it.
That was when you would first come out and just run around ringside.
Yep,
right?
Just going around the ring, and they had, walking around the ring, and then they had all the managers vying over me and see who was going to get the deal, and then God only knows why they picked Johnny Valiant.
That's my next question. How did you get paired with Johnny V?
They just Vince liked Johnny V. Like the Valiant brothers were actually, were big in New York,
right.
And they were actually the tag champions in New York for many years, and Vince liked Johnny V. And wanted to give him a chance, wanted to give him a break there or something. So that's what they did, and the Beefcake thing was off and running, and it was getting over big time. It really got over well.
I guess your first feud there was with David Sammartino.
Right. That was WrestleMania I.
Right. What are your memories of the WrestleMania I?
Well, it was exciting. There was Mr. T.
Right.
And there was a lot, starting of celebrities, and started meeting people, and Madison Square Gardens is just an incredible place to work, and the electricity and the excitement of just being there, and much less going to the ring with David Sammartino, with Bruno Sammartino, the living legend, in his corner there with him, and just the electricity was, man, you just had chills when you went out to the ring,
Right.
And it was great though. They had a good plan for me, and they took care of me, and I enjoyed every minute of beating the hell out of David Sammartino. And then and eventually, we wrestled. I wrestled even some tag matches with Bruno, Johnny V, and I wrestled some tag matches with Bruno. We wrestled Bruno in his hometown of Pittsburgh.
Right.
And couldn't have been a tough pill for him to swallow to have to put Beefcake over, and Johnny V, him and his son, and I know him and his son were having some problems too. They didn't get along real well. And they wound up parting of the ways, you might say. And so the thing with David and I didn't really last a long time, but it was a good run for me, and it definitely helped, start Beefcake on his way and give him a good springboard there.
Question. I know I heard from a lot of people, I don't know how true it is, that the first WrestleMania was a real risk for Vince to take, because it was basically a make it or break it situation. As far as
I'd probably go along with that. He was definitely stepping out into unknown territory,
right?
With this big pay-per-view and
syndication,
and hiring and spending a lot of money, guys like Mr. T and different people that were there, and so I would say he was taking a pretty good chance.
Did you think it was going to be as big as it is? Or
nobody ever had a clue that it was really going to be as huge as it was, but afterwards, then we all began to realize, we were really on the right track, and that that things were going well, and that we're going to do only going to get better at that point. We were
right.
We were on the launch pad. The rocket was taking off, and we were on our way up.
At the time, who was like the locker room leader? Was it Vince because he was the boss, or was it Hogan? Did he have a lot of power at the time yet, or?
there was a lot of big talent there, a lot of guys in the dressing room. There's John Studds,
right.
and there's Andre, and there's just so many guys. But Hulk was always a good inspirational leader, but just he was always cool, never lost his cool ever. Was always a businessman, and never and got along with everybody. And everybody, anybody, a lot of guys would always look to him for advice and help, and he was always there to give it. And I definitely think he definitely helped to pull, everything together, because with just good business head, good, just a good guy in the dressing room, always willing to help guys, didn't have a big ego, and, like you couldn't talk to him or anything.
Right.
He got along with everybody.
I guess my next question would be, what are your memories of your house show series with Hogan when you first started working with him?
Oh, man, we had some great matches. It was a great privilege to work with him. I mean, everything was sold out. Mostly all the guys who worked with him, everything was always sold out.
Right.
And I was no different, because I was a hot heel and a new, thing, and the beefcake thing, and the yell stripper, and I mean, everybody wanted to see me get my ass kicked. And it was pretty easy for him too, because we were friends and we worked well together, and he knew I would, I wasn't going to hurt him out there. And so went in the ring, and we had a lot of fun. We had a blast. And I especially remember working a show in California, what was it, across from San Francisco? What's the other town?
Oakland.
Oakland.
Right.
And it was in the Oakland Coliseum. And Hulk's brother Alan was in the crowd at the time, and along with about 100 Hell's Angels. And man, that place was packed to the rafters.
Right.
It was sold all the way out for weeks ahead of time. And I remember we came blasting in there late, about 8:30 or something, and Chief Jay Strongo was all over me. God,
Right.
I was like, shut up. He's working with me. Leave him alone. Come on, give him a break. And because we were the last match of the night. We were at the gym.
Right.
Working out. And we came in. And after the people were in the building, and we drove in and came in and got ready and everything, and then went out to the ring, and we were having a match, man, and boom, and I'm banging away on him, and I remember those Hell's Angels just closed in around the ring. I mean, even the cops were scared, man. The cops weren't,
right.
They weren't even trying to stop them, and those Hell's Angels closed in around the ring. And then I'm looking out, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm gonna die. This guy's gonna kill me. And he's laughing, I mean, like, and I'm scared. I'm really scared. I'm like, Jesus Christ, man, come on, hit me, or something, and then, I was like, we wound up fighting. We had to fight our way all the way back to the dressing room so he could get me out of the ring, because they just surrounded the ring and they weren't going to let us out.
Right.
They weren't going to let me out, until he made a comeback and started he got that big foot on me, and boom, and got the 1, 2, 3. And then we just kept fighting, and they opened up. We just parted the Red Seas. They let him by, and he just pounded on me all the way back to the dressing room. And I was like, man, so that was one to remember for sure.
Is there any other good road stories on the road around that time? I mean, you travel with probably everybody.
Well, things were cooking back then, man. We were wrestling 2-a-days on the weekends. We'd go and wrestle Saturday show in the afternoon, a Saturday night show, hop in a Learjet Saturday night, fly somewhere else, work a Sunday afternoon show, boom, jump in a Learjet again, fly somewhere and work a Sunday night show. I mean, everything sold out. $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 houses, every show, just boom, boom, boom. And, we were rolling and making money. And it was just a great, great time. Everybody was just happy.
Right.
Things were just rolling. People were making money. Even the underneath guys in the first matches were making thousands of dollars, a week. And it was just a super time.
Was the travel schedule hard on you?
It was impossible. We wrestled 7 days, and then we had our TV shoots and all that. I mean, you were wrestling. At times, I wrestled 12, 14 times just in a week because of the 2-a-days, and then the TV tapings. You'd have 3 or 4 TV tapings. And if you were a main event guy or one of the top guys, a top baby face, and I was at the time, then I was in one of the, being groomed for one of the top slots for the Intercontinental belts. And so, I mean, I worked every TV taping.
Right.
Had a match.
Right.
And then at that time, that's when I was teamed up. They teamed me up with Greg the Hammer.
I was going to ask you how you got paired with him.
They just he was the IC champion, and then I think Tito took the belt from him.
Right.
He was in a big program with Tito Santana, and they just, for some reason, I don't know why, George Scott was the booker at this time, and they teamed us up. He liked Greg a lot, and they teamed us up, and we just it was a very odd couple combination, but
you guys were called the Dream Team, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But we worked well together, and as I had known Greg from the earlier years, but didn't known him that well. But we wound up, gelling together as a team, and kept gathering momentum. So that's when they decided, they went ahead and put the belts on Greg and I.
I was going to ask you, was the title win over Wyndham and Rotunda, was that a hot shot, or was that like planned as far as like giving the belts to you guys?
Oh, they were definitely planning giving the belts to us. They Wyndham and Rotundo, kind of the crybaby team at that time. They wound up quitting. Right, we had worked up to a big angle, and I burned Barry Windham's eye with a lit cigar.
It was at Spectrum, I believe, in Philadelphia.
At Philadelphia Spectrum, man, and in front of 19,000, one of the biggest houses ever. And then they quit, and so they actually, that screwed us,
right?
Because we had put 8 months into a program, and then switched the belts because they were, what were they called? The American Express,
right?
All-American team, the 2 All-American boys, and here's the 2 brawlers, the Beefcake and Greg the Hammer, and burned his eye and put him out of wrestling for a while, and their big comeback, and it was supposed to go on for probably a year-long program with those guys. And now they were gone, and we really didn't have anybody to work with. They just had brought in the British Bulldogs. You had the Killer Bees, and you had Volkov and Sheik and Volkov, and who had the belts before, and just passed the belts on to Wyndham Rotundo.
Right.
And then we were in a big program, so that now we had to spend the next year getting the Bulldogs over.
Right.
And that was pretty tough.
I was going to ask you about that.
There were some real battles at first with those guys. I remember watching some of the old videotapes not long ago, and it was literally a fight from the get go with both of them, David Boy and Dynamite. They were both muscled up and hot out of Japan, and both been working in Japan quite a bit, and they're used to that Rambo just style of nobody sells and just boom boom boom, all kind of crazy stuff, and our style was completely different than that. It was more traditional, start slow and work the people and work in the ring and psychology. Greg Valentine was a second generation wrestler, and I would say a master of ring psychology and taking his time in the ring. Guy liked to wrestle 25, 30 minutes a night. That's, and had all his life. And had matches and wrestled hour matches with guys like Harley Race and Jack Briscoe, and wrestled for world championships in other leagues and the NWA days and stuff like that. So our styles were completely different. So it took some time, and then we rolled into WrestleMania II and put the belts on the Bulldogs, and then wound up working with them for almost a whole nother year.
Right. What was the atmosphere compared to WrestleMania I, or WrestleMania II?
Well, WrestleMania II was very exciting because I think that was the one we had 3 locations.
Right.
We did New York, Chicago, and LA. I think it was.
Yeah. Sports Arena.
New York, Chicago, and LA. And I think I was in Chicago. Yeah, Chicago. That's so long ago. Yeah, and you had the big battle royal with the football players in it,
and
all the guys. Yeah, so it was very exciting, and now even WrestleMania II was a big step, was a big chance. You had a huge amount of celebrities and bring all these extra guys in, and really nobody knew how that was going to go,
Right.
and how the simulcast with the 3 locations is, you know, I mean, there was huge expenditures there.
Was Vince changing as time as the WWF got more powerful, or?
Well, yeah, he was growing.
Right, he was growing
a little more. His power and things were, you know, going his way. No doubt about it. But things were still, you know, there was still, everybody was pretty happy with the way things were going.
Right.
Territory was doing great. Merchandise, everything was flying. People were making money. Scheduling was tough. You know, we were working, maybe getting 2 days off a month. So you didn't see your family. So in that respect, some of the guys were getting run down. You know, there was tended to be a few more injuries and stuff because guys were getting tired and you were pushing it week after week after week. But still, everything was still rolling along well, and we were still building momentum and rolling off that WrestleMania II, and then we rolled right into that WrestleMania III in the Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan.
Right. I was going to ask you about WrestleMania III and the Russos. What was that like?
Well, the Russos, I mean, they were good workers and everything, but there was some tension in there, and Greg and I, we didn't enjoy working with those guys that much. They, you know, our styles we didn't really like their style. I don't know if they really liked ours, but we did have some good matches and worked in many, many big houses with them. Cops Coliseum up there, 72,000 different places. We worked some huge shows. But there was a little bit of tension definitely in that thing. And that's WrestleMania 3 was where Dino Bravo wound up sliding into my spot, and they sent me off on my own. And that's where I was going into a program, supposed to start a big program with Adrian Adonis.
Right. And that's, I was, I guess, when Piper came in and they did the deal with him.
Piper did the hair match with Adrian.
Right. WrestleMania 3.
And I slid out to the ring and handed the scissors and stuff to Piper. And then he looked at me, looked at Adrian, and then he wound up handing them back. He said, "Man, you go ahead." You know, and that's when I did the deal on him. And next thing you know, when I really didn't had much warning of this whole thing happening, and then I came back and I'm in the dressing room, and they walk in and they hand me this white, like, doctor's coat or, you know, beautician gown or whatever you want to call it, with a comb and a pair of scissors, and they go, "Okay, now you're the barber." And I go, "Oh my God, what are you doing to me, man?" You know, the beefcake thing, I'm on fire. This is hot. The dream team, everything was going great.
Right.
And they'd split the dream team up, and now I got to start over from square one with
and they did all those vignettes too.
With the barber, but we did the vignettes, and then it started catching on, you know, and it was. Sometimes it was a little tough at first to just jump into this new character, you know, because I really getting entrenched into the beefcake gimmick, you know. So it was a little difficult at first trying to jump right into this barber thing, but you know, luckily it caught on, and I kind of got, you know, and I got rolling, got into it, and then it wound up just catching on fire.
Right, it did.
The people went crazy. When I came out there, those scissors and those giant hedge clippers, and I'd chase people around. And I got somebody down and started cutting their hair. Those people went nuts, and they went berserk.
Did any of the guys not want to work it to, you know, get their hair cut?
Well, that was the problem with Adrian. Adrian didn't want to work with me. I don't know. There was some underlying problems that went back to Dick Murdoch in the days when he was teamed up with him, and Adrian. I don't know. I had known Adrian for years, and I always got along with him and been in Japan with him. Never had any problem. Somebody had filled his head with some crazy stuff, and for some reason he had got this idea that he didn't like being here. And I really don't, to this day, I don't understand exactly what happened. Right. But the next thing you know, we did the big angle, and I was supposed to work with him, and then he went into Vince and said, "I don't want to work with Beefcake." And then next thing you know, he was quitting. I mean, they said, "Hey, you know, we just did this whole thing, and I mean, you're working with Beefcake. You know, it's the program." Right. And he quit. He just walked out. You know, and just threw. You know, and at that time, I mean, that was a hell of a. It was a hell of a break, a hell of a push. We're going to get really, right under main event status at this time.
Right.
We were right there. And to walk away from all that, nobody understood. Nobody really understood what was going on with him.
Right.
He just went off and was working independent. So I guess he was working in
AWA.
Calgary.
Yeah. I also went to AWA too.
Working up in Stampede Wrestling or for some other outfits up there. And, and just dropped out of sight, basically. And then got killed.
Car accident.
Yeah.
Right. Your memories of WrestleMania IV and your series with Honky Tonk Man.
Oh, yeah. That was, in Atlantic City?
Yes.
So many. That was interesting at the Trump Plaza there. It was a little different.
Right.
Working at the casino, but it was a good time. It was great. And the Honky Tonk Man he was always easy for me, with his style and Jimmy Hart and that whole thing. We gelled pretty well together but he was real touchy about his hair. He never wanted to get touched.
Right.
Didn't want to do a haircut, so I wound up cutting Jimmy Hart's hair every night. Poor Jimmy. And we put wigs on Jimmy. We did stuff. Put women's clothes. He was Peggy Sue.
Right.
I mean, poor Jimmy Hart had to take the brunt of the punishment because Honky Tonk Man wouldn't budge. But it worked. It all worked. It wasn't a big deal.
Right. How are the other boys in the locker room handling all the mainstream success?
Most of the guys were doing well. There was always some problems with some of the guys. Sometimes handling success is more difficult than handling, not success. Not being unsuccessful. Success can really test you. And there was a lot of guys we lost some guys in the early days there. Rick McGraw passed away.
Was drug use prominent in the locker room back then?
I wouldn't say in the locker room.
Right, not in the locker room. I mean, as far as
guys did their own things.
Right.
I mean, everybody did what they had to do, especially to survive on the road at that time. The pace of 300 plus days a year on the road. Some guys were taking steroids, but they were legal.
Right.
And as long as you're under a doctor's supervision and you're taking care of yourself. And I mean, we were professional athletes, like football players, like basketball, baseball, and every other athlete at the time. Anybody else who was taking steroids.
What are your views on steroids?
I haven't done them since early days when I was, trying to get big and size and they're not really necessary. I mean, and actually, when used properly, they worked, and they helped a lot of athletes, and they helped me at the time recover from injuries and helped keep me on the road at that time. But then after a while, it's kind of a phase that we grew out of once they were, made illegal and people going, oh, steroids, they're real bad. Well, why do hospitals use them? Why do they give them to patients who are recovering from serious illnesses and major operations? Well, because they help you when used properly. I mean, you can misuse aspirin and, you can misuse anything and it can turn into a bad thing, and steroids are no different. Right.
What was the locker room atmosphere as far as guys afraid to lose their spots and stuff like that?
Well, things were heating up a bit, as the WrestleManias were going on.
Right.
And things were starting, the competition. Hulkster had locked his spot in, but anything right from underneath Hulkster up to that spot, things were heating up. There was quite a bit of competition. The Pipers, the guys,
What was Roddy like as far as in the locker room was?
I always liked Roddy. I get along with him.
Right.
Because I know him from the early days, but a lot of guys didn't like him. He kind of stayed off to himself. He wasn't like, he was friendly, but, always kept himself, and I knew him. So it wasn't a big deal, but a lot of guys didn't like him. They thought he was a little bit hard to do business with, but Piper was always trying to look out for himself. If you don't look out for yourself in the business, nobody else is going to look out for you.
Right.
And so Piper tried to always look out for himself. He wasn't the biggest guy, not the strongest guy, not the best looking guy, not a big muscly guy.
But he could talk.
But, he knew his spot and he knew, what his strong points were. And he always pushed those, he capitalized on his abilities. And a lot of people, there's always people who are jealous of the people who are above them or who are making the big money. And there's always those guys that are trying to get your spot.
Right.
That's true in any business.
Right.
But in the wrestling business, it's very competitive, and especially where that kind of money is changing hands, and then it definitely can get a bit cutthroat.
Right.
I'm trying to think of more of the guys who were during these years. There's so many years to place who was there because guys were coming and going.
Right.
Guys would come and go from that New York territory, Boom, and then they'd leave for a while, and then bang, they'd be back, and they'd leave for a while, and then because I was there for 10 years straight, so I saw a lot of guys coming and going, and coming and going, and coming and going. You think guys say, "Oh, that guy will never be back," and then fucking a year later, boom, here they come. Oh, new deal.
Right. What are your memories of a feud with Ron Bass?
Oh, that was good. It was. I remember that's when we had the NBC Saturday night main events happening. We were doing MTV. I mean, it was, like Vince is doing now. They were rocking and rolling. And then we had with that Saturday night main event as the hottest show on TV, NBC, Dick Ebersol. Man, he was like a god, man. He had the golden goose, he had, and the shows are great. I remember I worked, was Tampa. I think it was Tampa.
Right.
And it was the big feud between me and Ron, and built up to the Saturday night main event. And then boom, I shaved his head.
Right.
And then I can't remember. He only worked for a short time after that. And I think he had some real serious health problems. And then I don't think he's worked since. As a matter of fact, I think, that was like his last hurrah.
Right.
To get his head shaved on national TV, but he was a good businessman. Ron, and I always liked Ron. He was a cool from the early days in the Memphis territory. He took care of me in the ring. I was a young guy and didn't abuse me like a lot of the guys did at that time. They could take advantage of you real easily in there, but Ron never did, and he was always nice to me, and he did a hell of a favor for me on that Saturday night main event. We had bull rope matches and various different kinds of matches throughout that program, and it was a great thing for me because he was a big man, impressive, an older guy in the business, a good hand, and he really passed the torch to me, put me over, and in a big way,
right?
And I thank Ron for that, and I really appreciate it. It was a good business thing to do. This is the way the guys in the business used to do business, and it's something that you don't see very often anymore. Guys passing the torch, like the way Andre in WrestleMania III passed the torch on to Hulk. It made Hulk was like the giant of the of the 90s, the late 80s, and then on into the 90s. Carrying the load, carrying the territories, and pulling the wagon.
Right. Who did you travel with those days?
Well, as long as when Hulkster and I were in the same territory, we traveled together all the time.
Right.
And otherwise, it was me and Greg Valentine throughout those all years. Greg was a different kind of character to travel with because he
was he quiet?
He was quiet.
Yeah.
And Greg always had a scowl on his face, like he was mad. People were scared of him, but I never paid any attention to it. Like if Greg didn't want to talk, and we were driving down the road, we didn't talk for hours sometimes, but it never mattered to me. I didn't take it personal,
Right.
It's just Greg. And I knew Greg. So people were scared of him, they didn't know what to think of Greg. And I used to laugh. I'd be sitting over in the corner laughing because nobody ever knew how to take him. The other wrestlers, if it came down to the match, if there was any problems, the ego problems in the match, I let Greg handle it.
Right.
Because Greg would just steamroll over everybody. I mean, he just intimidated, like he had that intimidation factor or something, and people were scared of him. They just didn't know what to think. He was quiet, and he always had a mean scowl on his face, But I would say something to Greg and make him laugh, and I knew how to get, right there. And Greg was a great hand too, and as far as traveling, because he's the one he showed me like the ropes of the country, going from town to town. Greg knew every town in the United States. I mean, he knew how to get everywhere, and New York and all the big towns. And because we did a lot of driving, even though we did a lot of flying,
Right.
we also did a lot of driving. Sometimes we fly into a main spot and then drive 4 or 5 days. And we drove thousands of miles in all kinds of weather, and snowstorms in Buffalo, New York, and all over Canada. And I mean, you name it, we were driving it. And Greg knew the towns, he knew, a place to go. He knew the arenas, and it was great, easy for me because then I wasn't out there on my own trying to find these things. I had Greg chauffeuring me, and I could take the wheel, but Greg he liked to drive. So, Greg and I was a good team. He drove and I opened the beer.
Cool. What are your memories of your feud with Ted DiBiase?
I enjoyed working with Ted. He's a great professional. He's a good, great hand. With Virgil, he was a nightmare though. You never knew what he was going to do. You kind of always had to watch him.
Right.
You didn't want him hitting you with anything because
right.
boy, he'd clock you or something. But Ted was great. I wish I'd really got a chance to work more with Ted and really have a good. We got a little program, but not.
Right,
we worked at leading up to the WrestleMania deal.
Right.
But we didn't really get a feature program or anything, any kind of longevity or anything out of it. And I'm sure we could have, that was the Barber Gimmick going then. And,
right.
But Ted was another guy with his, hair, and he didn't want to, you couldn't. And you had Virgil with no hair,
right.
Who was bald. So it wasn't a whole lot of cutting going on there. And if that was my gimmick, was being able to cut hair. And that's, how we kept the gimmick over as guys got their hair cut, right on the TV when I went in and we did the vignettes and the crazy,
right.
and the barber with the crazy eyes and the, coming out with a leaf blower and,
right.
And chasing people around with chainsaws like I did on one of the old, what was Vince's show called there? The
Superstars.
No,
Challenge.
No, the TNT.
Oh, Prime
Time
TNT show. Yeah,
the TNT show.
Yeah,
remember the
right.
TNT?
Yeah.
Where you had the talk show where
right.
you sat there,
right.
sat with the sunglasses on and wouldn't talk,
I remember that.
Jimmy Valiant Johnny would talk,
Right.
I wouldn't even talk to him. I said, don't talk to me, talk to him.
Right.
So it was goofy shit, but it worked. It was funny that show. I hated doing that show though. Oh, you'd have to fly in because you didn't get a break from your regular schedule.
Right.
You'd have to fly into Baltimore and go out there to wherever town it was, right outside Baltimore. You'd have to drive. It was way out in the woods there to the studio, and you have to do the tapings there, and then you'd have to buckle up all your stuff and run and jump on another plane and fly or drive like a madman to get wherever you're going.
Right.
And it seemed like we did that show all the time.
How was Ultimate Warrior perceived in the locker room with all the boys? I mean, I've heard from a million guys, he wasn't
a lot of guys didn't like Jim. Right. Jim kept to himself. I liked Jim. I knew him fairly well. We traveled a little bit together. We worked out together sometimes and stuff. And I didn't have a problem with him, Jim. But Jim was just in his own little world and kept himself a lot. And a lot of guys didn't. I guess maybe they didn't like him because he didn't socialize with them, or he didn't hang out in the dressing room and like everybody. And Jim didn't drink, And so let's face it, we spent a lot of time in hotel rooms and the bar after the show and this and that, and you never saw Jim in any of those places.
God.
And for that, I guess a lot of guys did. That's perceived Jim as antisocial or just stuck up or whatever.
Right.
But I never did. Jim didn't drink. He didn't party. That really, if he did, he stuck to himself. He was married at that time to a girl and then wound up splitting from her and so he had his own personal problems going, and he didn't fall right into that usual wrestler category, the drinking and partying and pill popping or whatever. Guys did their own things, were into whatever they did.
Right.
And Jim just didn't do that. And he was into his training, a serious weight, into the gym and his dieting. And you could tell by looking at him that, he took it serious,
Right.
and then there was a lot of guys that didn't take it serious. It didn't, well, I mean, not they didn't take it serious, but they didn't work out. Let's face it, this guy's Kamala,
Right.
guys, George Steele, guys
Right.
over the years that wrestled that you never saw a gym. They just went from town to town, and let's face it, it was easier if you didn't, no doubt about it. But Greg and I worked out, and as did a lot of the guys working out. So trying to find a gym and getting in the gym and working out in between all the traveling, flying everywhere, and the driving and everything, it was tough, and it made it a little bit more difficult on your scheduling.
What are your memories of your Rick Feud or Rick Rude series?
Rick Rude was an interesting guy. I actually knew him. I knew his family. I met him when I was in the Carolinas in the early '80s and stuff. And I never had a problem with Rick or anything like that. We worked together fairly well. I remember we had one match. I think it's St. Louis or something, and wound up doing something to him, and it scared him. Some kind of something out of the corner. And we both went down, and he didn't know what I was going to do. And he came up, and it was very close to being a real confrontation there. And because I had scared him, and we had a little verbal problem for a little while, but we sorted it out. But Rick was the guy was, a little different, is into his own thing. And, he did the training thing and I liked Rick, and I knew his family actually, and had a thing going with his sister for a long time.
Right.
She was a great girl. She's married now and has kids and everything. She was a bodybuilder and trained, and I had some great times with him. And God bless him. I can't believe he's gone.
Right. What about Randy Savage?
Randy Savage, he lives in Florida down there.
Right.
And I've been round and round with Randy for many years. I came into WWF before Randy did, because I was in there late 83 or 8, and then Randy came in 84, early 84, and they did with Elizabeth, that whole deal. And so Terry Hulkster worked with Randy extensively throughout the years, and at that time, Randy was a little schizoid with this Elizabeth thing. He used to lock her in the dressing room, was afraid to let anybody see her, touch her, or anything. And I think his paranoia kind of destroyed his marriage. Just my opinion, but, a lot of guys, he was just a little weird, and at times he was a great worker, but at times he was a little hard to work with because you never knew where he was going to come from. He was always how he was upset, out of his mind, pissed off, or what was where he was coming from. Sometimes it was a little hard for him to sort his personal life from his business, and that made it difficult when you had to wrestle guys like that. They couldn't separate those two things. And I mean, I always liked Randy, and to this day, I mean, he still is in Florida. We don't really have any contact. I'm sure probably things, Hulkster and I feel very close, and there's some feuding going on down there as far as that goes. And another friend of mine, Hawk, the Road Warrior Hawk is a friend and for many years too. And there's a feud going on between those two.
Right.
And I think it's reached out all the way into the legal system now. There's some legal problems between those two. Going to court is probably pretty soon.
Right. Hawk talked about that on his interview. So
yeah. So I mean, Randy's just kind of alienated himself away from all of us. I mean, he used to work out with Hulk and I, and every morning in the gym, in Hulk's gym at home, or at the World Gym or Gold's Gym, wherever we were, decided to go, whatever. Hulk's got the gym right in his house now, and Randy was there for quite a while, working out with us all the time. But now, he hasn't been on that scene for quite a while. Right. When Gorgeous George came onto the scene, he just really dumped everybody, and we kind of really saw that whole deal coming. We said, oh man, Randy, don't, take this as a grain of salt, but, geez, one of these days her true colors are going to come through, and you're not going to like what you see probably. And, it's going to wind up biting you in the ass. And then it did,
right,
big time. And he like blamed everybody, but, for, you guys she tried to steal my girl. And he thought it was paranoia again, thought everybody's after him.
Right.
Or something, everybody was gunning for him. Everybody wanted, things were no different with us than they ever were. If Randy needed us, then he came around. When he had the girl, he didn't need us. He had 24/7 her under his wing and parading her around, doing his thing. That was fine. Then when the girl split again, then he came back around for a little while, and then things got out of hand, and he just went off into his own world. Now I don't see him or hear from him anymore.
Right. When Flair came in, what was your reaction in the locker room?
Well, I met Flair back in Carolina territory, so and worked with him in the a lot of the other territories. Rick was a champion that traveled around like Harley with the NWA, and he traveled with his belt to Portland. He traveled to a lot of towns. So I had a lot of contact with Rick. So, Rick was another guy I went in North Carolina territory. I've been to his house with Greg and I met his family and stuff, So, I liked Rick, and he was a personable guy, always upbeat guy, loved the business and took care of the business, always stood up for the business.
Right.
And, I respected Rick a lot for that, and always worked hard in the ring, gave it 100%, was always professional. Ric Flair always looked the part. I spent many nights with drinking champagne and driving in limos with Rick, because that's just the way he lived his life. And, I liked him, and I never had a problem with Rick. It never bothered me that if Rick got the limo or Rick had his own deal, and everybody had their own deal. I never was jealous of anybody having success.
Right.
I didn't ever feel that anybody's success was at my expense. You make your own breaks usually. There's some guys who have had some pushes and some treatment over the years, which I don't think is exactly pertinent or deserving, let's say, just because they kiss somebody's ass. Or,
do you want to mention names or no?
Okay. But that applies more in the later years. I think WCW is what I'm referring to. So
we'll talk about that soon. Did you ever consider jumping to WCW at all before you eventually left, or no?
No, okay. I didn't want to leave WWF actually at the time, but things in 93. They've been trying to push Hulk out for a while. They tried to replace him with the Warrior, and they tried to do this and that, and they were not having much success really. And Vince was becoming increasingly a little more hostile towards them. They were, but Hulk was still in control. He was still the man. He still had his own deals going. He was still making huge money, bigger than ever.
Right.
And, the fans were starting to change. The business was starting to change a little bit.
Right.
And you have to be able to change with the business, with the times. And, maybe in the 90s, it started to slow down a little bit. Hulkamania had lost a little bit of momentum, as did a lot of things. But I think Vince at this point was becoming a bit greedy. And, maybe, that's my opinion, but I thought, had he maybe considered bringing Hulk on as one of his partners, and just keeping him and using his knowledge and for finishes and of the business and angles and everything, which he had great ideas over the years. So many of those, the angles, everything that was successful, most of a lot of the ideas were all, partly his or all his. So I just thought Vince could have handled it a lot differently, and that transition of the 90s could have been more smooth, could have been smoother for everybody.
Right.
And it wasn't necessary to go to WCW, but Vince has that attitude that he wants to do things his way, and he wanted to do things his way, and Hulk had, his ideas of what he wanted to do. And so then there became a parting of the ways. And then so there was certain, you know, if you call them cliques or camps, but you had the guys who were, you know, Hulk friendly, and then there was different other guys who were friendly, and other, you know, different office guys, and you know, and so I was obviously a Hulk friendly guy. So when Hulk was getting ready to leave, they were pushing me in that direction too, you know, which I really didn't care that much. There's definitely always life after WWF, you know, because I had a great career going. It was just the accident that I had in 1990 definitely was a huge setback for me. It made it very, very difficult. It was a difficult time in my life because I nearly lost my life.
Right.
And making the comeback after that was the years when I did the barber shops,
right,
and which were hugely successful. And I wished that we hadn't stopped doing them. I wish they had let me continue doing them, because it would have been a great transition back into the wrestling, but more on a part-time basis because of the extent of the injuries to my face, and the titanium and the steel and the screws and the wire and everything.
It was a power sailing accident, right?
Parasailing accident, yeah. And it was, you know, the doctors really didn't want me wrestling at all, and technically it's crazy to be doing it.
Were any of the boys apprehensive about getting back in the ring with you?
Well, some of the guys were definitely a little bit gun shy and everything, you know. It's like, ununderstandable as I would be with somebody in the same position, you know. It's you know, this don't, you know, this one spot right here, don't, you know, you can hit me, kick me, you know, do anything you want, but just don't kick me in the face, you know, which is a fairly easy thing to do as far as I always thought, you know. It's just like, don't push that one button, you know.
Right.
You know, so yeah, but I didn't really have a problem with it, you know. My family was having a big problem with me wrestling after that, and you know, but it was hard to. It was a tough time for me. I went through a murderously horrible divorce right during the accident time. I suffered a bunch of huge lawsuits from some business ventures that I was involved in. Excuse me. And I basically lost everything, and had it not been for Hulk pulling me out of the pits of hell and taking me in and with his family and helping me recover and get me back on my feet and pushing me off on my own again, you know, and getting me started, you know. God knows where I'd be right now.
Were a lot of guys jealous of your relationship with Hogan? Or?
I have to say, definitely. Over the years, you see it here and there, you know, and stuff. But I mean, we were friends before the business, and we've always had a great relationship. Even his wife even would go, "Oh, you guys, you're fun. There's something funny about you guys. You never argue. You guys, you know, I don't think we ever had an argument in 26 years because we like think alike, you know." It's like I say things, and he, you know, that he's thinking. He says things that I'm thinking, you know, like we're just tuned in. We're from the same. We grew up in the same, within 8 blocks of each other, from the same town. Went to the same high school. Played baseball. You know, he was a musician. My father was the president of the Musicians Union of Florida. He worked under my dad for years and years. Never even really realized it until one day he says, Your dad's Ed Leslie." I go, "Yeah, my dad's Ed Leslie, president of your union." You know, he's like, "Oh man, you know, after that's your dad, I've been going in front of all these years for grievance, you know, to complain about treatment and shit." You know, I was like, "There you go, man. Small world, right?"
Did you see Brett and Shawn as an upcoming star? Did you see them like making it to where they are today? Did you think they would? Or
Bret Hart, you mean?
Yeah, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels.
Yeah, Shawn did well. I never, you know, Bret was always a great hand, and the Harts were did well. You know, good wrestling, technical wrestler. I wrestled Bret quite a bit in the early years, early Brutus Beefcake years, and a lot of the house shows and stuff. You know, and I was happy to see a success. I never really foresaw that Brett would have made it to where he did with Vince, but I wasn't unhappy to see it. I wasn't jealous of his success or anything like that. I thought I was, it was great to see a guys who, Brett didn't had the greatest personality, outgoing personality, let's say,
Right.
But he wound up, he took, those things which he had, those attributes, he had a great skill in the ring. It was his ring skill. Brett wasn't always the greatest talker in the world. You had him and Neidhart tagged up for a long time there. And Jim would carry the load more on the talking end of it, I thought, but Brett did come around and, and was able to, really excel. And he did fantastic with Vince. And it was a shame to see Vince do what he did to Brett.
Right.
And he actually used Sean to do that. And Sean and Marty Jannetty were a couple troublemakers back in the early days. I mean, they were constantly getting their hands slapped for screwing up all the time. And they were there's two kids and they were giving them a hell of a break. And they were constantly screwing up, and I mean, to this day, I see Marty a lot, and I like Marty a lot. And I really hadn't seen Sean in later years. I didn't really get to see him.
We did an interview with Sean, and he kind of said, that's Sean saying that, so I don't get mad at me, but Sean said that Vince was kind of glad to get rid of, he said, the Hogans and the Beefcakes and stuff like that, because he had a lot of younger guys that wanted to work and they weren't lazy in the ring, and he wanted to replace a lot of the older guys with the younger talent and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'd go along with that, but I wouldn't exactly say we were lazy in the ring.
I mean, it's not
I
like
would
he had
say
200 emotions or something.
Well, there was the new, like I was saying, the new generation guys, the newer style, things were starting to change.
Right.
You got the luchadors, and you got these guys are smashing through tables and, all this stuff. But I mean, take a look at the match I saw last night on TV between Undertaker and The Rock. I mean, they're not doing anything any differently than we did 15 years ago in the ring. The same match, heel and babyface. I mean, and they're in there working and punching and kicking and doing, they weren't busting through tables, and I mean, they were working, and I mean, we were doing the same exact thing, and just that, I think Vince maybe wanted to get rid of the Hulks and Beefcakes because we came from a generation of guys that stood up for themselves too, and that demanded our fair wage for our work. And, we were well paid back then. There was a lot of guys that were making some big money. And I think Vince found out that he could bring in these young and hungry guys for considerably less money.
Right.
Because like I said, I think he's getting a little bit greedy.
Right.
And that was a contributory factor. They got a bunch of guys that are working for $500,000 a year, and some guys $1 million, and merchandising, and I mean, making a great living. And then now you got some younger kids that'll come in and wrestle for $100,000, $500,000, $100,000. Vince, more money for Vince.
Right.
And he liked that, and some of the, I definitely say there some of the older guys were definitely, slowing down in the ring and everything like that. But I remember, I worked my butt off in the ring, and in those last years that I was there, I worked hard. I don't remember being lazy. I mean, we kept, and working in the ring is there's two different things. I saw guys going boom, bing, boom, bang, bang, boom, jumping all around, and people didn't respond. It didn't matter. What's the difference where if you could go in the ring and go like this,
still get right, and
the people go crazy and you're selling tickets? I don't see what the deal is. If you got skills and you can manipulate the people, you can work and not have to jeopardize your body. In the meantime, longevity is something here. I'm going on 23, 24 years as a wrestler. It's almost unheard of for the guy that has all his bones and everything and staying on the same place. Look at Cactus Jack. I mean, Mick Foley, whatever you want to call him. He's the commissioner now. I mean, he's destroyed his body. And I guarantee he hasn't been wrestling 24 years. He's, in the last 10 years, just 15 years, destroyed his body to the point where he has to have help to get out of bed.
Right.
You know, and I mean, his career, he can't even really wrestle. I don't know if he's still wrestling, but to my knowledge, he's not really wrestling at all anymore.
He's going to do a couple spots here and there.
You know, he'll once in a while, but he's destroyed himself through these hot shotting tactics, let's say jumping off cages through tables, and he's destroyed his own body. You know, I know he's got a family, and as do I, and there's a lot of guys. And I'm just thinking of, you know, I don't know how much money he made in those old days, but as far as I could tell, they were laughing about him in the back room. Oh, the guy's crazy. Yeah, we paid him an extra $50. I jumped off the cage and smashed the table and broke his arm or ripped half his ear off. I mean, and they're laughing at him. You know, nobody ever is going to remember the years. Yeah, what a great move that was in Cactus Jack in 1986 in the so building in so USA, Iowa. Who's going to ever remember that shit? He's got to go home and play with his kids, and he can't get out of bed. He can't hardly walk down the street, you know, or anything like that. And to me, that doesn't mean anything, you know. To me, it's important to be able to still be able to do what I want when I get old. Right. And using my head to take care of myself.
When you and Hogan entered WCW, what were your first impressions of Eric Bischoff?
Well, Eric didn't come in right away, I think. Trying to think, the early days, we were there and we were doing Thunder in Paradise, a TV show in Orlando, and those guys started coming around. Well, maybe Eric was there. I'm trying to remember. I thought, from what I knew of him, he was a guy who really didn't know all that much about the business, wrestling-wise. He was just a guy that they had in there, and it was using him to help run the things and production-wise, you know. But knowledge and ability, like of wrestling, had very little. You know, it was very limited. And he needed to rely on guys like Hulk Hogan and me and other guys, veterans in the business, to help and to put all these things together and gel this whole thing and make it all work. And I think that's what happened. He got good talent. He got good guys, knowledgeable guys, and surrounded himself with these people, sucked that knowledge and ability and you know, brainstorm and, you know, using their ideas and their thoughts and pulling those all together. And that's what we got WCW on track.
How would you compare that locker room to WWF?
A little bit more relaxed. Things were a little stiffer in the WWF, especially in later days after drug testing and stuff like that came into play. And, you know, they started fining people for being late. They started getting a little stricter, and things became not so much fun anymore. And there was a little more dissension in the ranks. And, you know, then WCW, to go to see WCW was a lot more relaxed in those days. There wasn't any drug testing things, and there wasn't, you know, people standing at the door writing down your name if you came in a few minutes late, and they weren't slapping thousands of dollars fine on you, which is ridiculous, you know, or something, you know. And you're traveling millions of miles, and, you know, you're trying to work out and do all this stuff, you know, if you're a few minutes late. But it was kind of refreshing in that respect.
When you first came in, I think you came in as a butcher, right? With Kevin Sullivan?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the first real name they hung on me.
Right. Did you try to use the Brutus Beefcake gimmick name, or was it because Vince copyrighted it?
Yeah, Vince had copyrighted the name, and, you know, had definitely made it very clear that if I tried to use the name on TV, then legal action would be taken. I actually spent quite a bit of money in the legal system trying to obtain rights, trademark. Vince even though he had basically illegally trademarked my name, technically I can trademark my name and he can license it and, you know, and use it and stuff like that. But really, I don't know how he can trademark the name Brutus Beefcake and own it.
Right.
without me being in there too.
Right.
You know, and being able to have the rights to use it. But he did. And once something like that's done, according to my attorneys, they, you know, that was illegal. But once it's done, then undoing it is a whole nother thing.
Right.
You know, and he has the resources, the deep pockets. And, you know, after a couple of years of fighting for royalties, monies, and trying to obtain the rights to use my own name, I had to give up the fight. And we just signed off on each other because it was costing way too much money. And there was no light at the end of the tunnel. There was no, you know, guarantee that I was going to get anything, you know, or get anywhere, you know, in the fight with it. So I decided to let it go until which time I could maybe do something else and
Right.
pick the name up when they when they dropped the trademark rights after 7 years. They didn't refile. I guess figured he didn't really have any use for it. I mean, he's just probably selling videotapes still, but most of all the merchandising stuff with Brutus Beefcake was all long gone. So,
What are your memories about I guess, with Kevin Sullivan when you first came in?
well, I know, I remember the Butcher days. I got some good main events, a pay-per-view with Hulk,
Right.
I think, which was fun. It was a lot of fun, and got to work with a lot of guys that were, you know, that I liked, and that we had the Dungeon of Doom going
Right.
with Curtis, Iakia, and who's a longtime friend of mine in Hulk's, and working with him was a great thing. He lives in Hawaii, and
Going out the next week, probably to see
yeah,
him. So.
give him my best.
All right.
And I really like him. He always treated me like a son almost, you know, and he, you know, all my respect for him and in the business. I watched him in the Florida territory
Right.
since I was a kid. And if there was one guy I was really scared of, that was him.
Right.
I remember his forehead with just ridges from the blade jobs in his head. I mean, and I remember, I never saw him in the ring when he wasn't bleeding,
Right.
you know, and he was just ferocious looking at it, you know, even though really now to this day, I know he could hardly move. He didn't really do anything much in the ring. There was no back flips and you know, all this
Right.
saltos and moonsaults and everything. But man, ferocious wise, I mean, I believed in him. I mean, he made believers out of the people, you know, and he was over. You know, and the people were scared to death of him, you know, and just because he was a worker, he knew, you know, he knew how to work.
Right, right.
Go out there and didn't have to go out there and run around, take a bunch of bumps and do a bunch of silly shit. He went out there using ring psychology and won over the people and got over. And to me, that's what it's all about.
Right.
It's not how many bumps can you take, how many moonsaults can you do, how many tables can you smash, how many chair shots, how many baseball bats. That's all tools for people that can't do the other things. They don't know what ring psychology is. They can't work with the tools. That's yourself in the ring. You got to have extracurriculars. You got to have, you know, props.
Right, right.
You know.
When Randy Savage came in the promotion, was there any tension between you and him because of his problems with Hogan? Or?
In the WCW?
Yeah, in WCW.
Well, Randy always knows where my loyalties lie,
Right.
so there's always a little bit.
So it probably worked out eventually.
Yeah,
Right.
there was always a little tension, but my all loyalties were to Hulk and always will be.
Right.
Yeah.
How would you compare Eric Bischoff to Vince McMahon?
No comparison, basically. I mean, let's face it, Vince is a genius, and you know, you might not like him, but you got to respect him, and you got to respect what he's done. And I think Eric Bischoff was just lucky. He was in the right place at the right time. He had guys like Hogan and me and a lot of other guys that helped him along the way. And then as soon as Eric Bischoff had to stand alone, fell on his face. Territory fell on his face. Everything went down, 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 down. When Hulk and people were pushed aside and they stopped using ideas and it stopped being a whole group participation thing where everybody contributed.
Right.
When people took over and started just using these ideas, things went to hell.
We'll come back. Yeah. Sorry about that. All right, I got lost. Well, how'd you finish it?
About Vince.
With Vince and Bischoff.
Okay, sorry about that. How do you attribute the NWO success to? Why do you think it was so over, the NWO, the whole idea of the NWO?
Well, that's a good question. It was just something that right. It was just timing wise. A lot of things are timing. Just it was a good idea, and at the time people were looking for something, and it was like you just had all these gang related problems, and the gangs were big in the news for a while, and then it was like the NWO was almost like a gang,
right?
Of hoodlums, of wrestlers, but it worked. It just worked when the guys, and they came in and they utilized, interviewing and different things and little innovative stuff. And once again, Hulk's ideas, and they used the cameras, and they went and did stuff, and they did vignettes and lots of different things. And the guys came in and they leave people laying behind the curtains, and they just, interesting. They kept changing stuff. There was always people like wanted to know, well, what's going to happen next. We got to watch what's the NWO going to do this week, or what's going to happen next. And they did it in such a way that there was interest. They left something to your imagination. They just didn't spell it out, telegraph exactly what's going to happen to where, like, oh, well, we know that Sting's going to come down from the ceiling, he's going to hit him with a baseball bat, and everybody's going to run away. And then, it gets boring, and then people lose interest when it's so obvious as to what's going to happen.
Right.
The NWO, in its early days, had brought in this new life to the territory, and that's my opinion.
How were you treated when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash came in? Did you get along with those guys?
I knew Scott Hall before he broke in the business, and I never had any problems with him then. And then I didn't know Kevin Nash. He was Diesel or whatever he was before that, and didn't know many of the other territories. I never had worked with him before, but I always felt there was definitely some dissension there. There was some problems. I don't know. To this day, I really don't know. Them guys, what was said when I left the room or not, I always felt like things were being said.
Right.
And then that I wasn't, very well liked, to be honest with you. Once again, probably maybe that jealousy factor. Everybody, knowing that I'm a friend of Hulk's.
Did anybody ever try to play you guys against each other? You and Hulk?
They might have tried a little bit, but it would never work, because Hulk and I talk too much. We're too close, and we would know instantly if anything that was said like that would be completely would roll off, would never register, even because he would know better and I would know better.
Right.
If they even tried, it would be a joke.
Right. A lot of people said that when WCW was really bad, Hawk would basically step down and stop helping Eric Bischoff. Basically, he would just wait and watch the ratings fall, so they would bring him back and get his help and stuff like that. I mean, is there any truth to all those stories?
Well, you might say a little bit, but it wasn't because Hulk wanted to step back. It was because they were pushing him back, and they were pushing and pushing and pushing to do certain things, and he was fighting them tooth and nail, because he wasn't fighting them just to keep himself over, but he was fighting them to keep everybody over, to try to keep the territory going, because we all go up together, and we all come down together, and that's always been Hulk's philosophy in the business, and that's why the WWF, we all did so well together. As Hulk went up, everybody went up. The territory, things were doing great, and then as they started picking away at Hulk, trying to cut his legs out from underneath him, then the territory started to suffer.
Why do you think they tried to?
Vince wanted to replace him.
No, I'm saying even in WCW too.
Well, they want to replace him. There are a lot of people said, Hulk, you're old and it's time to step down. And the guy's a good businessman. He made a lot of money. And there's always, I don't care where you go, there's always going to be a lot of people jealous of those people who are making big money, and especially the ones who aren't making big money, or that feel that they're not getting the fair shake, or they're not getting the break or the push they should get. And so there's a lot of people in WCW in people's ears and running around and, saying things and doing things to, to undermine authority, to undermine certain people like Hulk, and and to try to cut his throat, and eventually, once they got him out of the picture, I don't know, it's fairly obvious to me that as they pulled more and more real solid, good workers out, pushed them aside. I mean, not saying that a lot of the new talent, there's a lot of new talent that's fantastic, that's great workers, but as they try to push away some of the older guys away, and because they're old, I don't know, it didn't make sense to me. You should utilize the people like that and more in the office. Then if you don't like the way they work, then use their ideas. It's still, there's still a lot of guys can be useful in the business if they don't have to work every night. But to me, they just wanted to push the guys just completely out of the business. And you got guys that really didn't know that much. They weren't wrestlers. First of all, if you never worked in the ring and you weren't a wrestler per se, then you really didn't. I don't know how you could really know the business and the way you need to know to run it
right,
like it should be run. I mean, Vince was a genius in the marketing angle and everything, but working angles wise in the early days, Vince didn't think up all the angles. He had huge, great workers, Pat Patterson and different people, Gorilla Monsoon,
right,
hugely successful, brilliant minds in the business thinking up his angles.
right.
Vince didn't think up the angles. Vince ran the business. So you got Eric Bischoff, don't know shit about the business. I mean, I like Eric, but I really, he's trying to think he can let him run the business, but you need people in the business, connected with the business, the minds, with business minds, for angles and things like that. Solid angles. There's hot shotting and different goofy things. You can make up this character and that character, and this is funny, or hey, that's funny, but you gotta have solid wrestling angles, solid things, solid characters to keep the business going. And that's where they've shied away from and kept pushing away people like that away. And I think they just suffer the consequences now. It's a joke.
Do you think WCW, one of the main problems is it's like the boys are running the asylum?
The inmates are running the asylum?
Right, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
I don't know. I saw things happen when Scott Hall and
what do you think
Kevin Nash
as
took over. I know they did. I'm sure they didn't like me. I know it's one of the first guys that, I get fired 2 or 3 different times from WCW, just out of the blue, a couple times. Bang, get a fax to my house. Came home, my wife's all upset. She goes, "Oh, it's just a fax. You're fired."
All right.
So I wanted to go to Terry's. We'll go to Hulk's house to go for workout. I go, "Hey, yeah, check this out." He reads it. I'll make a call. Oh no, it's a misunderstanding. Oh, they didn't mean to send that. Okay, you got to. You're working. And I was like, what do I do? What did I ever do to these guys? Only thing I was ever guilty of: showing up on time, have a good attitude, do whatever they ask you to do. Nowadays you need to be a jerk. Don't show up, miss towns, refuse to do a job. Don't want to work with anybody. Don't want to do anything. Be difficult, hard to get along with. That that's a qualification to be a top guy. Be a jerk.
Right.
I don't understand it, man. I always got along with other guys. I could work with anybody. I don't hurt anybody. My work is solid.
Another question. I guess when I'm trying to think where I want to go from this one. All right. How do you feel about the openness of the business these days? As far as like how open the business is, as far as even guys doing promos in the ring, they're doing lines for cater toward the smart fans.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that
Right.
that much. The way it's gone, I'm still a little more geared towards the old style of the business and taking care of the business, respect for the business.
Right.
Much as you want to tell people that it's entertainment, that this and blah 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 blah, still sticking to the lines, the old way of thinking and solid wrestling angles. Doing your promos, keeping it fairly serious and not going too far out in left field. I think this, once again, those people that have done that and those things you're saying, and that's where the business has suffered and has gone so far afield to where you're bringing in TV movie star people, putting a belt on them for a week, making guys champions. And to me, they've made a joke of the business, and the business is suffered and is suffering, and they're suffering the consequences. They're reaping the rewards. They're reaping what they've sown. They've sown shit, so they're getting a shit crop.
Right.
I mean,
do you think WCW will ever catch up to the Titan?
Not a chance. I don't think. I would be surprised if they stay in business 2 more years.
Right.
Because to my knowledge, they're losing millions of dollars,
right.
And there's companies looking at there's new companies taking over. AOL, Time Warner, these other companies that are taking over are not going to sit back and watch this company lose $80 million a year and leave it go. Something's going to happen. Something's got to break. Somebody's going to have to take over, straighten this whole thing out, turn that company around, or it's going to be out of business.
Can you talk about what happened with Vince Russo and Hulk Hogan at the pay-per-view? Or
I can talk about it. As far as I know, I wasn't there, and just briefly saw what I saw. Like a lot of people saw on the pay-per-view. But I know that, to my knowledge, I talked. What Hulk told me was that, and I know for a fact of his contract-wise, he has creative control over his character. And there's also written very strongly worded in his contract that he is an established character, and his namesake is to be kept in a good light and to be kept, it's not to be slandered. It's to be kept, it's his livelihood. It's his business.
Right.
And they are obligated by law not to slander it, to slur it, to degrade it, to downgrade it, or whatever you want to say. And he also has creative control over his own character. So 2 things happen. Vince Russo and his narrow thinking wanted to do things his way. All right. When Hulk made the decision before that pay-per-view to and talk to upper people in WCW about maintaining his character, and he said basically that he was going to take the belt, and it was agreed to. All right, but it wasn't agreed to by Vince Russo. It was agreed to by people above Vince Russo, the WCW executives.
Right.
And Vince Russo basically went bullshit over it, because now it was out of his hands, and he was like a kid having a tantrum. He couldn't take it because he wasn't getting his way.
Right.
And he didn't want to see Hulk do what Hulk was wanting to do there, because he had been going in and out with these guys back and forth for months. And playing. They've been playing games with him, so he just decided, look, and he pushed some buttons on Russo right there by doing what he did.
Right.
And Russo lost it. He lost his cool. He just lost his head, and he told Jerry Jarrett to do whatever he was going to do, to go out there and lay down. And instead of being professional, I think Jerry Jarrett should have went out there and had a match. It's just my opinion, but he had to do what he had to do.
Right.
But then Vince Russo grabbing the mic, getting in the ring, and saying what he said about Hulk. It shouldn't be working. He was a piece of shit. that he never should be in the ring, didn't deserve to be in the ring, that he would never be in the ring again. That was another breach of his contract by saying what he said. So, I mean, there's going to be some major problems. So
where do you see Hogan ending up? Do you think, I mean, of course, Vince could always do huge business if he ever went back there.
There's a lot of doors open at this point. Hulk can do whatever he wants to do. He can go where he wants to go, like he always has.
Right.
And, you know, I know he is, you know, his career is definitely winding down, you know, and he knows that. And he's always been such a smart guy, a smart businessman, and able to capitalize on his strengths.
How did he get so much power in the business? You know,
it's timing wise. He came in at the right time when they needed some. The business was looking for a leader, was looking for something, a role model. The people wanted to see a role model, and then Hulk Hogan stepped up to the plate and became that role model for millions and millions of people for many, many years. And he was a great wrestler. He wasn't, but he was a great talker. He was a smart businessman and a smart guy and with a great head for the business. And he utilized all his strengths to the ultimate, you know, and was, you know, that's all I can say. It was just right place, right time, but he was, it carried over for years and years and years. He could have, like, there's a lot of guys who done well in the business, but they're like a flash in the pan. They had a 3 or 4 year run,
right?
But they didn't manage their lives well. They didn't manage their finances well. They didn't take care of themselves physically. You know, they couldn't handle their personal lives, and they split from the business, or they just disappeared. But Hulk was a guy who had his shit together.
Where do you see him ending up? What do you see happening?
It's hard to say.
Is there any truth to the negotiations with him and I guess Bischoff? I know Bischoff just started something with Fox Network or something like that. I'm not sure.
They've been talking to Fox Network. Fox Network has been interested in doing wrestling for years. Rupert Murdoch hates Ted Turner.
Right.
That's a public knowledge.
Right.
And they've been talking about doing business. They've definitely they've had some meetings, several meetings in the past. But to my knowledge, they still really haven't committed to the day when they actually commit money, bang, on the table. Then that's the day when you will see something happen. Right now, it's all talk, you know, and there's talk about this, and talk about run territories, talk about overseas. There's a lot of talk. I mean, the world's a wide open place. There's still a lot of room, you know, for wrestling companies to come and go. You know, Vince has his niche,
right?
And I'm sure he will always have that. But there's still wide open. There's a lot of guys, and I mean a lot of guys around the country that are still loyal to Hulk, because Hulk helped a lot of guys. Let's face it. I know, brother. I was there. I saw many guys that came and went through the years that Hulk reached out and touched and helped. A lot of guys for nothing, just because he's a good man. And he helped a lot of guys. He helped a lot of guys make money for their families. And over the years, and there's a lot of those guys that turned around and stabbed him in the back. And in these federal cases that Vince had in courts, a matter of public knowledge that certain guys went ahead and testified and said things that weren't true about Hulk. Just because they're jealous, just because they're trying to cover their own asses, and to me, it's a joke. It's ridiculous that they would stoop so low, but you know, shit happens,
right?
And that's the way it is. But you know, Hulk can do whatever he wants. It's not over till the fat lady sings, like they say. You know, it ain't over yet, and I keep telling them that. And you know, we've been looking at doing movies. I mean, I've done probably 10 movies with him and TV series and some other things. And you always hope that maybe that's something like that's going to come down the pike or something, you know, but who knows?
Right.
You know, and as far as wrestling goes, there's a lot of guys out there, like I said, that would definitely follow his lead if he decides to start up something or go with somebody who's already got something going.
Right.
So that's the world is a big place, and there's always that possibility is always going to be there, at least for a few more years. And I know Hulk's knee is giving him some trouble. He's got to, but
right.
He's still.
There's talk about him going back to Japan too. So
yeah, so he's still he's not done yet. Hopefully, because I'd still like to.
Right.
I still got a few good years left in me, and hopefully we'll get to work together because we've done great things.
Beefcake. But right now, I just want to basically ask you to comment on some of the guys that I'm going to mention. Junkyard Dog, for one.
Junkyard Dog, man, it was God rest his soul, too, is another guy that's since passed on. And I've wrestled Dog back in the mid-'80s, and I actually know Junkyard Dog from my time in working for Bill Watts in the territories of the Mid-South. And Junkyard Dog was over back then, huge. I mean, in Louisiana, it was a legend there. And he moved on to WWF and got over the people. And here's another guy, let's say, for instance, a guy that didn't move around the ring fast. He, let's face it, didn't do moonsaults.
Right.
He walked in there and had a dog collar and a big chain and got on there and danced and got the people up in the ring and to dance with him, and he reached out to the people and interacted with the people. And that's what wrestling almost is all about. The people come to the wrestling matches to get involved, to scream and holler and interact with the wrestlers. That's what everybody wants to do, basically. It's just some type of interaction.
Right.
And Junkyard Dog knew that and reached out and was a guy who went in there, did very little wrestling, basically, but was a big man, a solid, what he did in the ring looked good. And he got great ring psychology, and he could take and do anything he wanted with the people, bring them up and down and work the people. And that's what made it popular. And he was a great guy to hang around. And I knew him for many, many years. And, I wish he was around today because I'd still be wrestling him probably.
Right. Jake Roberts.
Jake. Wow. Here's a guy that I met in the early same territory.
Right.
Grizzly Smith, his father, he's got a brother too that wrestles, and Sam Houston. Yeah. And Jake, a guy with great talent, was a great talker, great ring psychology in the ring. And not a guy who did moonsaults and busted through tables, but he had his gimmick, the snake thing when he, and was always a good wrestler before the snake. That was just a tool that he could use to help get him over even more. But Jake, and there's a guy that success almost killed, and he's still running around today and working shows, but he's seen great tragedy in his life, and I'm not even sure what's happening, if he's still with his family. As far as I know, I don't think
he was just here last Sunday. We did one with him.
Is he still with his family?
Yeah, he's with
his daughter a little bit.
Yeah, he's off. Lost most of the. He's not with his family all the time. He's success in the business. He's partied and had a great time more than anybody will ever know.
Right.
And but success has almost killed Jake. It's like I was saying, there's a lot of guys can't handle failure, but Jake could hardly handle success. He just didn't know when to quit.
Right.
And I love him.
Right.
I always had a great time with Jake over the years, and I've wrestled him on several occasions, and he's just to me, he's a likable guy. I just, I can't say anything bad about him. I love Jake.
Kurt Hennig.
Kurt's another guy that I really like. I worked with his father in the early days back in 1980. 20 years ago when Kurt was first breaking in. I had some of the first matches with Kurt, and I have known him ever since. And I know his family. And I feel that he's one of the great workers in the business. Really, when he wants to, there's nothing he can't do. In the ring wise, I had some of the best matches I've ever had in my life. The most fun working wise was matches leading up to WrestleMania 7 when I wrestled Kurt in the Dome in Toronto.
Right.
And WrestleMania, and Kurt and I had some of the greatest matches around the country. Sellouts. We did great business together. And I just did a tour of Australia with him, and when he wrestled Rodman over there. And
Right.
I mean, they brought in Kurt because they knew that he could handle somebody like Rodman, a wild card, unpredictable. Kurt's a good hand. He's a steady hand. He's you can trust him, and you know that he's going to get it done in the business, and he's going to protect the business too. And you can, it's a guy that grew up in the business, second generation wrestler, respects the business and always will, and it shows.
What was Rodman like? Was he a crazy guy, Dennis Rodman?
Yeah, he's crazy. I don't exactly agree with all the kind of money they're paying him,
right.
and things like that. Sometimes,
right.
But I'm not gonna. He's having his problems,
right.
and I'm, I'm not, going to take anything away from him. I mean, he is a great athlete. There's no question
right.
about it. Basketball wise, I love to watch him on the court. I prefer not to see him in the ring too much, but because you got to hold his hand and babysit him out there, and it's and it makes my job as a wrestler hard, and it makes it a little hard to swallow too. When this guy's stealing all the money, and you're and you got to babysit him out there. But, God bless him, and I wish him all the best.
Who do you think are the next big and upcoming stars in the business?
The Mike Awesomes. There's a lot of the young guys. I've been out of touch with the business a bit, spent a lot of time with my family and pursuing other avenues to make money these days. But there are a lot of great talents in the business, but I think they need to concentrate on sort of their skills in the ring as much and they're talking wise and interviewing wise. They need to concentrate on interviewing and learn more about ring psychology and working and not so much sensationalizing the match by flipping out and flipping in and relying on those things to make the match. I think they need to just get back a little bit more to the basics and actually wrestle and stay in the ring a little bit more. Now it's wrestling. It's out of the ring. It's in the rafters. It's through the tables. It's tearing down the sets. It's, and they dropping from the ceilings and with the baseball bats. And they got away from, they've got too far afield and need to get back into the ring and just stay in the ring. And that's the mark of a good wrestler. Somebody can get in the ring and work in the ring. And I think that's what you will see. The new talents, the best talents will be those guys who can master that, who can talk and who can master the ring,
right?
And without having 10 props to rely on to try to get over.
Where do you see the business in the next 5 years?
I think it's going to keep going. I don't know how much longer they can ride the crest of the wave that they're on now.
Right.
Let's face it, it's hot. I mean, they're doing well. I mean, WWF wise, I mean, it just goes to show you how WCW can be so far down and WWF can be up. I mean, business needs competition though.
Right.
For a lot of companies, too many companies to fail and just leave one on top is bad for business, almost for everybody. The more competition there is, the more companies that are successful, I think it's going to be even better for business. So I like to see some of the other companies coming up.
Right.
Hopefully ECW, some of the other rival companies or whatever, if they can come up and give Vince some competition. I think that's going to keep the business up. But I think the way with Vince on top and everybody else down, I think that's going to tend to erode. Vince's business is going to erode slowly but surely and it's going to come tumbling down. I think when it does, it's going to be real tough for anybody to take it back up there. But I'm not saying it can't be done because they said after the 80s that wrestling was done.
Right.
And then it cooled off in the 90s, let's face it, it did. But then it took off again.
Right.
And as long as you got people that with personalities that can get out there, flamboyancy and personality, and they can project, and you got the Rock and young talents that can get out there and perform too.
Right.
Then you're going to have wrestling popular, and you're going to have guys making money.
Question: what gimmick did you prefer, or what did you like best? Brutus Beefcake, Zodiac, Booty Man, Disciple, or?
I always liked the Brutus Beefcake.
Right.
I mean, the Barber was a great gimmick and the cutting hair, but I wish I had got a chance to keep going with the Brutus Beefcake because I saw I saw quite a few characters that came down the pike after me that really kind of got the chance to take, especially like Shawn Michaels,
Right.
that got a chance to take the Brutus Beefcake from the point where I left it off to the Shawn Michaels thing.
Right.
You know, and that's where I really saw myself in that kind of, the Shawn Michaels thing. That's
Right.
He kind of got a chance to take it from where I started and take it to another level. And that's what I wish I would have got a chance to do that with the Brutus Beefcake thing. But,
Right.
You can't second guess fate. That's things happen.
What was your most memorable moment in the business so far?
It's really hard to nail one down because I'm very fortunate, and I've got a chance to do a lot. I've been all over the world, wrestled in most of the countries of the civilized world, and wrestled the greatest, and Andre and all the guys. And it's really hard to nail down one. I mean, it's just so many. Probably some of the championship matches, I guess, probably I've had with Hulkster in the '80s were probably some of the highlights of my career. Madison Square Gardens and wrestling in front of 90,000 people and live audiences. Probably Silverdome when I got to shave Adrian's head
Right.
in front of all those people. That was definitely right up there amongst the top moments.
Is there anybody that you didn't get a chance to work with that you would love to work with?
Well, I can't really think of anybody. I've been, like I said, fortunate to wrestle for many, 23 years now. And I've worked with a lot of guys in the business.
Right.
Harley Races and Inoki from
Right.
Japan. I mean, just the list goes on and on. It'd probably go from here to New York. If we stretch from Philly to New York, if we lined up all the guys I'd wrestled and all the matches I've had over the years, I can't really think of any that we've left out.
Okay. Quick backtrack question. When Jim Hellwig came back to WCW and you were part of his little group, did his attitude change as far as in the business, or was he the same Jim Hellwig from the WWF?
Basically the same. I thought his attitude was great.
Right.
Jim wanted to work. He was ready to do what he had to do. I mean, he got in there. It was unfortunate that he tore his bicep, that he had that injury.
Right.
And right off the get-go. And I thought it was just tragic that had to go that way. Especially it was tragic for me because I was tied up in the middle of all this.
Right.
And wound up getting dragged down when negotiations broke down between them, and Jim basically just took off, and he has his own things going in the cartoon business and some comic book stuff overseas, and he has his own gym, I guess, still in Scottsdale, Arizona, where he lives, and he's happy with his life, and he really doesn't need WCW.
Right.
He didn't need them. They called him, and Jim just once again, Jim was independent. He wanted to do, what he wanted to do. And, when they were iffy and didn't know where they were going to go,
right.
or weren't sure, they were him-hawing around and Jim just said, "Hey,
right,
see you later."
And
I got stuff to do, and if you guys can't make up your mind, or play games, and you're not, let's talk money, and they didn't want to talk. They were going back and forth, and Jim just split and did his own thing. And I can't blame him for that. I was sorry to see it happen,
right,
because it really broke my back. Because they tied me up with Jim. They didn't make a deal with him. He split and left me nowhere, and hanging in limbo,
right.
let's say, as the disciple. And I thought disciple could have got over. The beginning, it was getting over, and they could have done anything with him.
Right.
And they just let it die.
What was the funniest rib that you've ever seen or that you have pulled?
Funniest rib. My God. Man, I've seen so many. Man. The British Bulldogs were
right.
a couple
Shaving
of real
people's eyebrows.
classic ribbers, man. They used to cut guys' pants legs off. I mean, put locks on their backs. 50 locks. Guys come in and his lock, pick his bag up, would be 50 locks on his bag, or it'd be briefcases. Guys with these fancy Halliburton briefcases,
Right.
you know, those $300 bags, you know, they'd super glue the locks shut in them, you know. So, you know, I mean, it's hard to say. There's guys like Fred Blassie, the guys in Japan, they took and put shit all over his doorknob to his room, you know. So when he came to the door, you know, grabbed the doorknob. Oh, he had shit all over his hands, man. I mean, I think that Adrian did that to him. I'm not sure.
Right.
I heard Mr. Fuji was.
Fuji, man, would sit at the bar or in restaurants and bars and stuff and piss on the floor under the table. And guys would be sitting at the table with him. He'd be sitting there. Whoa, I'll have a beer. And he'd be pissing on their feet.
That's
He used to do it to everybody, you know, but I knew him. I never would sit next to him, you know.
Right.
I'd sit over here and watch him piss all over everybody and on the floor bars. And I'm just, I'll be like this laughing, you know, and people going, what's wrong with you? You know,
Right.
oh, they had no clue.
I heard he was the worst with Saito. It was a 2-hour drive, but he'd make him drive 8 hours so he can sleep in the car and he'd give him wrong directions and like every.
You name it, Fuji. He did. You name the rib, Fuji's done it. I mean, yeah, that sounds like it. I can't remember a particular instance, but Saito was susceptible. He would, you know, he didn't know any better. You know? And Fuji would love to do that shit, man. He didn't care. He would let somebody drive 6 hours, so he'd just sleep in the car, you know, make him drive around.
That's great.
Send him around the state, you know, about 3 or 4 states the wrong way.
In closing, do you want to say anything to your fans out there?
I'd just like to say that Brutus Beefcake, he ain't dead yet. And, you know, I've been having a great time touring the United States and abroad, all overseas, having a great time. Seeing a lot of people wherever I go in the airport, still having a great response. People love to see Brutus Beefcake back, doing some haircut and then strutting
Right.
and the old barber thing, you know. And I just want to thank everybody over the years for supporting me, and you know, especially in that time when I went through with the accident. You know, I had a great fan support. A lot of people, thousands and thousands of letters. I mean, it would like filled up my garage at my friend's house with hundreds of thousands of letters supporting from the fans. And say thanks to like Bill Apter and George Napolitano, who are good friends of mine and have always supported me, and you know, wrote hundreds and thousands of magazine articles and covers. And George and the guys, Bill, keep up the good work, brother, and keep watching because Brutus Beefcake is still going to be around for a while.
Cool. Thank you. Cool. Thanks a lot.
TitleMatchNetwork.com